To know who we are, and where we're going, we must know how we arrived here. Welcome to Rephetic, a revolutionary study of the Great Pyramid, which promises to rewrite civilization's history.
Let's go.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
G1's interior. You ready?
G1's
You ready?
Yes.
I assume you guys are ready.
Yeah, th're ready. They were born. They've been waiting their whole lives for this.
So I apologize if any of this is arduous, but so here it is. And again, all these images will be up, and then they're also all available on the website, Rephetic.com. Okay, so we've watched a few of these things. Here's the first thing we're going to do, okay? Let me put this in front of you. Okay, so this entire study is still using names like King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber, okay?
Right.
Not even descript names, okay? So here's what we're going to do. First things first is we're going to go through all this. We're going to give them locational names.
Okay.
Or compositional names.
Okay.
And then fast forward in the book, everything is itemized. Everything has a, what do I call it? An ID number.
Okay.
So every shaft, every chamber, every bit of evidence within the features and conditions has a specific evidence number. Okay.
This I like an ID number.
Yeah.
Right. Got it.
But this is how you would approach anything, right?
Sure.
So for whatever reason, this has not been done. Okay, so G1. Entrance. And let me get this the script thing up here. So we've got the descending passageway. We're going to call it's to the north. We're going to call that the northern main shaft. What do you think of that?
I like it.
Okay.
Because it's in the north.
Yeah. There's also, for people who are fond of acronyms, which I am not, okay, it's the NMS.
NMS, I like it.
Northern Main Shaft. Wow, go figure. So again, I'm going to describe some of this as we go through it. This shaft, give or take 350 feet long. Top part is masonry. Bottom part is hewn through the limestone, okay?
Okay.
Give or take, it is straight and square within a half an inch over 350 feet.
Really?
Okay?
Yeah.
We're going to get back to this. We're just going to walk through it. At the intersecting, give or take, 150 feet is what is called the ascending passageway.
Okay.
We're going to call that the Girdle stone shaft. Okay? Because in that shaft, there are either 3 or 4-sided girdle stones that are used at intervals. Okay. And that's the important evidence in that shaft. The important evidence within the northern main shaft is its precision.
Okay. Yeah.
So further down the northern main shaft, it intersects with what has been called the well shaft. Okay, the well shaft traverses between the northern main shaft and the grand gallery. Okay. Which so we're renaming the ascending passageway, the Girdle stone shaft, the well shaft is a vertical main shaft. At the end of the northern main shaft, it levels out to what I call the entrance shaft to the hewn limestone chamber. Okay? The hewn limestone chamber, formerly the subterranean chamber. Within that chamber, you've got another well shaft, which I call what do I call it? It is the hewn limestone chamber well shaft.
Got it.
So I do use the term well shaft.
Okay.
To the south is a small little afterthought chamber.
Okay. The SMS.
The SMS, southern main shaft.
Okay.
Go figure. The evidence within the hewn limestone chamber is it's concluded to be unfinished. It's got these, right? It's
hence the SMS here, just...
Yeah, but more the hewn limestone chamber in itself, okay? It's got basically a finished roof. The walls are roughly finished. The floor slopes to the east.
As opposed to square, like
as
everything?
opposed to level square. You would conclude that the floor is unfinished, let's say.
Okay.
It has these buttressing outcroppings that are still there, right?
Okay.
Channeled in between them, things like this. This is thought to be the first burial chamber in the accretion theory, okay?
Okay.
This chamber, which this seems inconsistent, it doesn't have a portcullis chamber, which is where they would drop stones to keep people from entering the chamber.
Okay.
Okay, as is interpreted up at the king's chamber level. Okay, so a couple things with the hewn limestone chambers concluded to be unfinished. There's no portcullis system. The well shaft there is, and I can show people on this too. Mm-hmm. Through this whole process, the well shaft of the hewn limestone chamber, and this needs verification as well, it's in the further research, seems to be on the pyramid's southeast axis. Okay?
So tell me what I'm looking at here.
This is an overhead.
Overhead shot.
Overhead of the interior.
Okay.
Okay, that's this.
So, but does this go that way?
No, it goes this way. It's just an overhead. This is north, here, see? End.
Got
giving
it.
you shit.
No, you're good.
North, south. These are the interior shafts and chambers of my modeling, okay?
Okay.
So, and I'll describe some of this here in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay,
Got it,
so
got it.
this is the nature of the hewn limestone chamber, okay?
Okay, so I'm looking at that.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
You're looking at all of this from above.
That whole thing.
Yep.
Okay.
So this is the top chamber here.
Okay.
This bottom one here is the hewn limestone chamber. Okay.
Okay.
See these sticking off the side?
Yep.
Those are these masonry vents here. Okay.
Okay.
And in the center here is this grand gallery. Okay.
Got it. Okay.
So
okay.
I'm giving you the layout. We're going to give you some of the evidence.
Okay.
And then we're going to describe the Orthodox narrative associated with this.
Only the Orthodox.
Yeah, right now. That's
okay.
it. Yeah. Yeah. So later, and I didn't mention this, I guess I mentioned it earlier, but after this Orthodox critique and examination of the evidence, it would seem, following the progression of the book, that we're going to do a geological discussion.
I think we should.
Yeah, and then that's chapter 5 in my book. Chapter 6 is my interpretation of this interior.
Okay.
Okay, and then chapter 7 is the build hypothesis.
Got it.
So,
okay.
But that's not for now.
But just laying some groundwork, folks.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Okay. So back to what has been called the ascending passageway, the Girdle stone shaft. Straight up, it meets at the northern end with what has been called the Grand Gallery, which is corbelled. Okay, it's 158 feet long. Mm-hmm. It's 28 feet tall. It's about 8 feet wide at the base. Okay?
Okay.
There's corbelled stone, which encroaches, right?
Okay.
And it disperses weight. So a corbelled 158-foot chamber would be the corbelled limestone chamber.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Makes sense.
Okay. So that's there. We're going to talk about the evidence of that in a minute. So at the top of the Girdle stone shaft, at the northern end of the corbelled limestone chamber, to the south is the entrance to the limestone chamber, formerly the Queen's Chamber.
Okay.
This is relatively barren entrance shaft leading to the Queen's Chamber. And a lot of coverage has been given the Queen's Chamber, which I am going to call the limestone chamber.
Okay.
So because it's an assembled masonry limestone. Okay.
Okay.
So in the limestone chamber, there are a couple of features. One has been popularized, the Granite Brink robots, they first went up the northern. Again, there's two shafts.
Right.
They oppose each other on the walls. Okay. They were first initially covered with wall limestone. Okay. But yet they existed behind that. So they are opposite each other on the north and south wall. There's no justification given for that. One to the north, one to the south. Those features don't exit the structures, unlike the shafts later in the granite chamber, which exit to the outside of the structure. Okay?
These do not.
Yes, and so I am calling those masonry shafts. A lot has been said about, well, they were air shafts, or they're star shafts that happen to point to particular stars at a particular time. Okay? So, and again, have you seen the door with the two copper handles, and they drilled a hole in the southern shaft? Nope. You haven't seen any of that?
No.
Anyway, people will be familiar with that.
Okay.
But also in the limestone chamber, the ceiling stones are gabled, so big gabled slabs that rest against each other. Okay, that's important for later as well. And that same motif is at the entrance. Okay.
Okay.
And has recently been discovered in the quote unquote hidden chamber, or the void. There's gabled ceiling there as well. It's not in this model.
Okay.
The model precedes this recent discovery. Okay.
Okay.
But it's literally behind the main entrance, straight above the northern main shaft. Okay.
Got it.
And again, this was the muon detection. It shows another void above the corbelled limestone chamber. Okay, so back to the limestone chamber.
That was recently discovered.
The void?
Post starting this book?
Yeah. There's been a lot that's happened since then. But again, now, it certainly doesn't impact my work at all.
Right.
But the new chamber that was discovered, empty. So what
was that for?
What's the point?
Right.
Okay. But meanwhile, in this whole discussion too, Hawass, there's a lot of bluster about hidden chambers. We have 3 burial chambers, right?
Right.
And some Orthodox authorities are talking about a 4th, right?
Okay.
Which speaks to the confidence in the 3-chamber theory, okay? Like, what's the point of that chamber if there's a 4th chamber? Okay. Just a quick side note. Anyhow, limestone chamber. In the east wall of the limestone chamber, there is what's called the east wall niche. Okay. Inside that east wall niche, there is, and I use this term untimely. Okay, so excavation to see if this goes anywhere. Okay, so that would be untimely excavation. The east wall niche, by some, is, and I think Lehner suggests this early on, was maybe just ornamental, decorative to house a statue of Khufu. Okay. Issue, and we're going to double back on these things, right. But the issue with that is that corbelled limestone serves a singular structural function. What is that? It's to support the load above an open space. Okay? So pin that. Corbelled limestone to support a load above an open space. So the question is, and we'll get to it, when was that east wall niche an open space? Okay? Which we'll cover later. So that's the limestone chamber.
Got it.
Formerly the Queen's Chamber. Back to the corbelled limestone chamber, formerly the Grand Gallery. And again, I itemize all this evidence in the book. I may not go through all the listing and the ID numbers here. But this is the picture most people see. They look at the Grand Gallery. Here it is. It's this big, long, sloping thing. back up a quick second to the northern main shaft, the girdle stone shaft, and the grand gallery. No steps. Okay?
No
0 steps. The northern main shaft, and I didn't give the size of all this and all the measurements either, okay? But basically 3.5 by 3.5.
The main shaft.
Northern main shaft, girdle
Okay.
stone shaft.
And girdle
okay?
stone shaft. All right. 3.5 feet.
Hardly to accommodate people,
Right.
okay?
Makes perfect sense. Okay.
Okay, well, that's one of these items, okay? And then as we double back on this, we're going to classify items or evidence as crisis elements.
Okay.
Minor, like, oh, that's curious. The shaft size doesn't really accommodate a person, much less a funeral procession, hauling the body and, what do you call it? The mummified coffin of Khufu, okay?
Right.
And no steps. So these might be, let's call them minor crisis elements,
Okay.
where the form and function, the form doesn't seem to match the concluded function, okay? So in this whole discussion, and we're going to get right to the corbelled limestone chamber, and throw out any questions you got here, Joe.
Well, just in regards to...
Because we're going to go about another 15, 20 minutes on this, and then we'll wrap on this interior
Yeah. So just orthodox
narrative. Let's
narrative
call it.
for...
Assimilation attempt. Okay.
Right. So for the 2 shafts, right? The girdle shaft and the... What was it?
Northern main shaft.
The northern main shaft is a passageway.
Just to get to the first burial chamber, and then the girdle stone shaft is to access the upper chambers.
Right.
Okay.
And it's a 3.5 by 3 foot.
Yeah.
Right.
You would not fit in there.
Right. I'm not carrying anything. I am not. Right. Or it's making it no steps.
No steps,
Right.
and hardly accommodates a person.
Right.
So let's
Let
check
pin
that. Yeah. And again, as we double back, that is arguably a minor crisis element. Okay.
Right.
So, corbelled limestone chamber. We got the 158 foot long. It's sloped at 26 degrees. Okay. There's a trough in the center, 2 benches on the side. Okay. Let's start at the top. So at the mid height of it, there's a 7-inch slot that's 1 inch in. It runs the full length. Okay. It's on both the western wall and the eastern wall. Okay. In the benches, there are, there's some contention over long bench slots or short bench slots. Some are maybe angled this way and some are angled to the vertical axis, okay?
Okay.
And then above each of those, there is what are called a wall niche. Sockets? Shit, I don't even know what I referenced in the past, okay? But a wall socket. We skipped over something here at the...
And this one?
Yeah, but we'll just keep going past that.
Okay.
The bench slots, the wall niches. In the wall niches, there was a rock, like set into them, okay? Across the face of that, there was some wearing on the face of the inset stone and also either side of the stone, okay? I think there's 28 of them on the west bench and 28 on the east bench. The first 2 to the north didn't have wearing. First 1 or 2. I may have this wrong. I'm sorry.
Right.
And then at the top of the grand gallery, there is what is called the Great Step, which is this picture. Okay. The Great Step also has some slots in it. Okay.
Okay.
The Orthodox assimilation, if you will, is at the back to the girdle stone shaft. There are 3 big granite stones, plugging blocks. Okay.
Okay.
They're give or take 30,000 pounds, all 3 of them together. that block entrance into this, okay? It is concluded that the entire corbelled limestone chamber was to house those 3 blocks. 158 feet long, sloped at 26 degrees, 28 feet tall for 3 blocks, okay? Add that to the minor crisis elements, okay? Where the form doesn't justify the function.
Right. Doesn't seem to. All right.
And then moving on to the top of the corbelled limestone chamber, we've got the Great Step. Now, this, along with, remember I mentioned untimely excavation in the east wall niche?
Right.
This appears timely, okay? But there are conditions that maybe don't have a cause. So every condition that we see at features or whatever, shafts, chambers, you can conclude that there's a cause to that condition.
Right.
Be it timely or untimely, okay? So the Great Step is one of those. Presently, this huge V groove on the front of the Great Step is filled in with concrete, okay? Pin that.
Okay.
In the center trough, Jean-Pierre Houdin was the French guy that proposed the internal construction ramp structure, okay? 2008. Jean-Pierre Houdin proposes some sort of a counterweight system in the corbelled limestone chamber. Okay, that was the first real attempt to assimilate what is concluded to be wearing inside the trough. The walls of the trough have distinct wearing in them, okay? And the V wearing of the Great Step. Some contact made to cause and create that V wearing. So Jean-Pierre proposes this counterweight system, okay? Other than that, there's no justification for a cause for this wearing. There's no justification for the cause of the wearing in the trough. There's scant justification for the bench slots or the wall niches or the wearing on the inset stones, okay? There's also scant attempted assimilation for what the mid-height groove is, okay?
Right.
Like I mentioned, 7 inches, give or take.
Does the Orthodox say...
Yes, they do. Well, maybe this housed some slats with some attic chamber that divided the chamber into 2 parts, okay? That's about it. That, let's call it a mid-height guide groove or whatever it is, has a lot of marring and chiseling on it as well, okay?
Okay, pin that.
Pin that, okay?
Right.
So Great Step wearing, got that?
Got it.
Moving out of the corbelled limestone chamber. Now, just quick mention, right above the Great Step, on what is the east wall, is the entrance to the attic chambers. So the little shaft high up on the 28-foot tall that goes into to the south to access the attic chambers, okay?
Yeah, is that not on here?
Yeah, it's right here. You can see it.
Got it.
It's right here.
You got to keep referencing so I know where we're at. Okay.
For sure.
Which leads into
the attic chambers above the granite chamber, okay?
Got it.
So heading south out of the corbelled limestone chamber, we enter what is called, so I call that the entrance shaft, okay? We enter into what is called and deemed the antechamber, which is concluded to house this portcullis system, okay? And people will be familiar with that. So this portcullis system is basically, again, these are interpretations, that it would have had wooden beams with ropes over them that raise and lower these stones to block entrance into the third and final burial chamber, okay?
Okay.
Another point of note on the limestone chamber is there's no portcullis system barring anyone from entering what is the offered second burial chamber either, okay? So again, we've got inconsistencies with where's the portcullis chamber in the hewn limestone chamber. in the limestone chamber, the queen's chamber.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then finally, there is one when you get to the king's chamber.
One out of 3.
1 out of 3. That's pretty consistent. Okay, so this antechamber is made of granite. So there's a transition from limestone into granite. Okay. The floor shows some disruption. Okay. Petrie notes this as well. And then there's, so the last thing in, I call it the intermediate granite chamber. So the antechamber. Intermediate, because it is, granite chamber. It's made of granite. Okay, does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay. It's a good name.
Great name.
Great name. Okay. The southern wall of the intermediate granite chamber has these notches in it, which virtually everyone concludes were some sort of rope guide. Okay. These little, and I believe they're give or take 3 inches. There's 4 of them on the southern wall. Okay. Now this picture I'm showing you of the southern wall demonstrates what I observe to be a very similar or nearly identical V-shaped wearing as we observe on the Great Step. Okay? That, what would you guess are the chances that that is also filled in with cement?
I'd say the chances are good, Dave.
Chances are 100%. Okay?
Right. Am I looking at the floor or the ceiling?
That's the ceiling. You got to duck down to go right through this next chamber. Right? Excuse me, the entrance shaft.
But this is the ground on the big step.
Yeah, the Great Step.
The Great
that
Step.
is at the floor level.
That's interesting that it's on the ceiling.
Yeah, it is. Okay, back up just real quick. I want to address something. So this southern wall of the intermediate granite chamber demonstrates this damage. The damage is concluded to be that damage occurred by the tomb robbers trying to get past Plug Stone in here or the Portcullis stones. Okay? I have another interpretation for that, but that is what is
so
concluded.
That is concluded for the damage here.
Yep.
That they made that similar V shape.
Yep.
Trying to gain access into the
That's it.
tomb.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Back up to the corbelled limestone chamber. So the floor level of the intermediate granite chamber and coming up to the king's chamber, which I identify as the granite chamber,
right,
because it is. The floor level of the Great Step, the floor of the intermediate granite chamber, the floor level of the granite chamber is 141 feet, okay? Which we're going to double back on here, and we're going to do this all really quick.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
141 feet. I'm going to write that down.
Okay.
So back to leaving the intermediate granite chamber, going to what is the king's chamber, renamed the granite chamber. Okay? Basically barren, other than what is called the coffer. Okay? Mm-hmm. The stone box. For purposes of non-prejudiced talk, let's just call it a stone box, a granite box.
Okay.
Okay. Aside from its barren nature, it has the masonry shafts going to the north and to the south, which do exit the structure. Okay. The other notable evidence is the cracks along the southern end. Cracks along the southern end of the ceiling beams. These ceiling beams, along with the other attic chamber ceiling beams, and I think it's at least 41 of them. I think there's more. I have this number wrong in my head. But they weigh up to 70 tons, okay? They're give or take 150 feet into the structure, okay? Those first have to come from the Nile Harbor, 200 feet to the base of the structure, and then another 150 feet into the structure, okay? So, yeah, that's notable evidence. So what seems...
According to the Orthodox.
Yeah. No, they have to get there somehow, no matter whose theory, right? So, Petrie's description. So we have disruption to the floor in the intermediate granite chamber. We have disruption to the floor in the granite chamber. We have the ceiling beam failure, which a lot of people have studied and modeled even that may have been caused by the weight above them, okay? But what seems to be most curious about the damage in the granite chamber is that Petrie notes that the walls are displaced outward, give or take an inch, okay? From their place at the floor, let's say. Okay?
From when they were originally built.
Yes.
It's pushed out.
Yeah, but again, good luck. Good luck understanding how the walls were outwardly displaced by an inch. Okay, Petrie attributes this to seismic disruption. So some earthquake caused the disruption to the floor, to the walls, and then the downward pressure of the pyramid above, the attic chamber beams, and the granite chamber ceiling beams is what caused the failure across the southern portion. Okay. And then, which we already mentioned, so leaving the granite chamber for now, back to the corbelled limestone chamber and the entrance shaft that goes to the attic chambers. The first chamber is called Davison's chamber, again, with the names, okay? So it was discovered, found with bat dung, things like this, okay? And then I described Weiss and the other attic chambers and the discovery of red ochre quarry marks, and Khufu's cartouche, okay? Interesting thing about that is there's no red ochre description of red ochre in Davison's chamber, okay? So if we got 5 attic chambers and 4 of them have red ochre marks in them, you would think that the 5th one or the first one might have some red ochre mark in them.
You'd think.
Yeah. So stick a pin in that. This is basically a description of the evidence within the Great Pyramid's interior. Again, all these images will be available, and with the naming, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so does that make sense so far?
So far.
Okay, so the Orthodox narrative is that we have the accretion theory. If Khufu dies in year 1, we bury him in the subterranean chamber. If Khufu dies when the limestone chamber is built, we bury him there, okay? If he lives and we get to finish the granite chamber, we'll just bury him in there, okay? We got the granite plugs of the girdle stone shaft stored in the corbelled limestone shaft. So in this whole thing, we've got no practical function for the forms, essentially, okay? And we have very few causes, or let's call them, what would you say? I don't know. They just don't seem likely, okay? So when you get down to likely causes which produce the observed effects, it's you can look at it and go, well, yeah, that's one interpretation, right? How about the other 10 that are available, right? And there's a few of these features that the assimilation attempt just doesn't seem to fit the structural either condition, or in the case of the east wall niche, the inherent function of corbelled limestone limestone. Okay, so doubling back, and we'll see if we can do this real quickly. A lot of the features, like we mentioned, the lack of stairs, the unaccommodating size,
right.
We're going to put those in the minor column.
Okay.
I'm going to address the majors here in the next 5 minutes, and then we'll be done with, so far, this interior situation. Okay? And so these stand out as major crisis elements about which, okay, orthodoxy doesn't seem to have an answer, okay? Or it just gets overlooked, okay? So first and foremost, science in general, right, is about hypotheses. Then we test the hypotheses through experimentation, and then we come to some degree of likelihood on competing hypotheses, which seems more likely, right? So when it comes to the Great Pyramid's interior, we seem to be a little short on assimilation attempts. Like I said, functions for forms, causes for effects, things like this. So the northern main shaft itself, 350 feet, true and square to within a half an inch, with a copper chisel and a rock. Okay? Possible. The responsibility of orthodoxy is to demonstrate that claim. Okay? I'm not saying it didn't happen. They have not shown us that by hand tools that they claim of the context that you could actually produce that shaft. Okay? So it's a failure of science. It's a failure of orthodoxy on this topic not to even attempt to demonstrate that thing. Okay, so that's a major crisis element. In the hewn limestone chamber, the position of that well shaft, another quick thing, was its orientation was 45 degrees turned, where the corners were east, west, north, south, not the sides of the shaft. Mm-hmm. Petrie described that well shaft as the most finished of the chamber, like the surface at that well shaft, okay? And again, needs verification, but it seems to be on the southeast axis of the planned pyramid above it, okay? So you're going to tunnel a shaft to a subterranean position, which is going to match the structure that you're going to build above it, okay? This cannot be done by the methods of the Old Kingdom. Can't be done.
Right.
The Old Kingdom method is called the second. It's a rudimentary rise over run, right? So when you're familiar with like the
rise over run,
rise over run, and what has become to be known as Pythagorean theorem. Okay, let's just call it sophisticated right triangle knowledge. Okay, so you can't position that well shaft where it is in relation to the pyramid to be built above it without sophisticated right triangle knowledge. The Old Kingdom did not have right triangle knowledge, okay? So there's no way to know where you are in subterranean tunneling unless you can calculate the a squared plus b squared, the c squared. You can measure that and you can know exactly where you are on the a and the b, okay? But you have to have that knowledge in order to do it, okay?
Got it.
That's a major crisis element. Next major crisis element, the east wall niche. Like I mentioned, that corbelled limestone chamber, the sole structural function of corbelled stone is to support the load above an open space. Nobody's proposing when the east wall niche was an open space, perhaps into and out of the chamber, okay? Major crisis element. The function or practical function or possible function of the masonry shafts outside the limestone chamber, right? There's no practical function. Zero. Okay? That's a major crisis element. Real quick, what is the northern masonry shaft has a westerly bend in it, okay? Which you could see on this image. Essentially, they go through all the trouble to make a westerly bend in the northern masonry shafts to avoid the stone of the corbelled limestone chamber, okay? How about just moving those closer to the west wall? Okay? With no westerly bend.
Right.
So there's a compulsion that they have to be where they are in relation to the western wall, and they have to be opposite each other, okay? So this northern shaft, this same thing happens in the granite chamber. The northern shaft has the westerly bend to avoid the other stones of the corbelled limestone chamber. There's a reason, or there has to be a reason, or you can conclude that, well, they just would have moved it and made it straight. I mean, so the question is, why do they have to be at a certain spot and not further west? And why do they have to be opposite each other? There's nothing offered from orthodoxy on those 2 points. Okay, so major crisis elements. The next major crisis element is, obviously I mentioned the wearing in the trough of the corbelled limestone chamber, wearing of what appears to be wearing of the great step, and what appears to be wearing of the southern wall in the intermediate granite chamber, right?
Okay.
So each of these things raises a certain... So the wearing is a specific crisis element, okay, which needs a cause. It just has to have a cause. Or potential causes, or multiple causes, I don't know. Or separate causes for each of those three things.
So which they have a cause for the king's chamber, but not the great step.
That comes to the damage, the first part. In the granite chamber, the king's chamber?
Right. Well, but you were saying that's a major crisis element, but the Orthodox don't have a method for the great step, the wearing.
Well, there's only one proposal right now, and that's
which is
Houdin's, this counterweight.
Oh, the counterweight.
Yeah.
That's what you said. Right.
And that would account for the wearing in the trough and maybe the wearing on the great step. But if we look at the southern wall as wearing, it doesn't account for that.
Right.
Okay. Southern wall of the intermediate granite chamber. Anyhow, so the wearing is a major crisis element, and we'll get to the floor damage, wall damage here in a second, because that's another major crisis element, and then we're going to wrap things up on this interior. So I mentioned the altitude of the great step at 141 feet. Okay, we can do the math. You guys can do the math if you did.
Grab your calculators, folks.
8th grade geometry. I've done this. You can spell it out. So the question is there any significance? Oh, back up real quick. The ceiling of the limestone chamber, otherwise the Queen's chamber, right, is on the east-west center axis. So it's equidistant from the north and the south.
Okay.
The front face of the great step is on that same axis. Okay?
Okay.
So it's just about the positioning and the precision, okay? So second to last thing, this particular height, okay, 141 feet, separates the whole mass of the pyramid if we use Petrie's concluded dimensions, 755.5 feet, 480 feet tall, 85 feet tall.
What is 141 feet from where to where?
That plane, the top of the great step, that plane separates the pyramid where the top volume mass is exactly 1/2 of the bottom volume mass. Okay? This requires the pyramid volume formula, which is 1/3 the base times the height. Okay?
Okay.
In order to place that, in order to create that feature, you have to have the pyramid volume formula. The Old Kingdom did not have the pyramid volume formula. They did not have sophisticated right triangle or Pythagorean knowledge. Okay? These are major crisis elements. And so, last thing, damage to the floor in the intermediate granite chamber, damage to the floor in the granite chamber, and the wall displacement in the granite chamber. These are major crisis elements. Okay? And Petrie's suggestion of seismic disruption doesn't seem to assimilate the nature of that evidence. Okay, you with me on all this?
Yeah.
Okay, so all of these, and again, we can list these out, and we're going to talk more about them. But we've got a Kuhnian crisis. We have the evidence. We have the Orthodox claims about the evidence. Okay, and so the two are inconsistent or fully contradictory, okay? And so it's the fully contradictory thing that gives us pause and suggests a couple things, right? And we'll end on this, so these major crisis elements suggest that either our understanding of the Fourth Dynasty in the Old Kingdom is completely wrong, okay? Which seems an impossibility because we have all of the other Old Kingdom evidence, okay? We know their mathematical lack of sophistication. We know their lack of sophistication in tooling and tunneling. We know their lack of sophistication in mechanics of any kind, okay? But yet, here is the evidence, and there's a contradiction. So we're either going to fully rewrite the Old Kingdom technology, make it more sophisticated than we know that it was, okay? Or these major crisis elements and the demonstrated sophistication implies that it was another culture that produced this structure, okay? And that's where the crisis comes to head. That's where we, the viewers of this history, we read orthodoxy, we read the alternative, we see the pushback, we look at the evidence, and you go, this doesn't add up, okay? And to the viewers, the choices are really three things. Ignore the evidence, not suggested, okay?
Yes. Yeah, change the station.
Yeah. Completely rewrite what we know about the Fourth Dynasty in the Old Kingdom. That doesn't square with all other Fourth Dynasty and Old Kingdom evidence, okay? Or you, by the nature of the evidence, you got to lean towards some sophisticated culture, not the Fourth Dynasty. And that's the first hint of this who and when, okay? Is just by confronting the evidence, we've got a lot of issues and major crisis elements, which they need to be resolved. And here's what I want to end on, another quick thing. So there's suggestions maybe of vitrification, which is when you heat stone, particularly limestone, it gets a glassy finish on it, right? These people lob a bunch of perhaps suspicions or possibilities about the structure inside, let's say. And this applies inside and outside. We'll emphasize it more on the outside as well. Guess how much materials sampling and materials research has been done on the interior stones. Take a sample, examine it under electron microscope, see what its exact composition is, see what its environmental exposure has been, right? Guess how many different areas within these 23, 24 shafts and chambers we've sampled stone and put it through materials research?
How many?
0.
Stop it.
0.
None. Not one.
We have an entire academic study, okay? Let's suppose it's scientific. 0 materials research.
Doesn't make sense.
Does not make sense. So this is why this entire study is where it is. These are the specific pieces of evidence which need resolution, right? So we're going to work towards all that. Next episode, we're going to take a look at the exterior and the essentials of the build, okay? So a lot of this, particularly of the interior, it's just fascinating, right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating evidence. There's lists and lists and lists of all the evidence of each shaft and chamber, right? I go through it. Petrie went through it. It's like, what are we looking at, right? And so you and I are going to do this, and then we're going to we're going to invite the audience to do it. And I don't make any. Let me also say that this acute Kuhnian crisis was inherited by all the current academic authorities. They did not create this crisis. They're not responsible for the crisis, right? Everybody alive today inherited this whole thing from generations past.
Right.
Okay? So it's not to point fingers and blame, okay, except where the science has failed, okay? Like not doing the research, not doing the testing, that's a failure of science. And a failure of the Egyptological and the archaeological community. So,
do you have theory on that?
No.
Like, why not?
No.
A lot of the the Graham Hancock stuff. It's like I don't understand. Like, it's here. Let's
why
study
wouldn't
it.
we do all the possible science? Right.
Especially with technology and
Yeah.
everything that we have available at our hands today, more so than ever. Why not?
Yeah, and so the end of my book, further research, like let's do the sampling, let's do the scientific testing by multiple parties, and let's accept the answers that are given, you know.
Right.
So that's the way to do science. What we're doing now, what we've been doing, cannot call itself science. Okay, it seems we have a narrative. There are, let's say, belief systems or research systems. We're really leaning towards a belief system and not a research system. Okay. So anyway, Joe.
Yeah.
Love you, buddy.
Yeah, I love you too, man.
So
This was great.
Yeah.
I like it. We're just getting started.
We'll get through more. It's a lot, and I hope it makes sense. And like I said, I'll put a bunch of those images up on the video itself, and then the rest of it will be available on the website. So
stay tuned for next. We're exterior.
The next one is exterior and the essentials of the build. So we're going to talk about that soon.
Nice.
All right.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, please share, like, and subscribe. Talk soon. To know who we are, and where we're going, we must know how we arrived here. Welcome to Rephetic, a revolutionary study of the Great Pyramid, which promises to rewrite civilization's history